Arthur Hodges was born in the small town of Okolona, Arkansas, a quiet place where life moved slowly and everyone knew your name. But Arthur wasn't like the others. Described by newspapers at the time as having the mind of a child, Arthur lived with profound intellectual disabilities. At the time of the crime that would seal his fate, Arthur had been visiting family just outside Amity, a small town nestled in Clark County. What happened next shocked the community. Arthur Hodges was just 21 years old when his life and the life of Clark County Constable William Morgan Garner were forever changed. On July 3, 1913, Hodges was arrested by Constable Garner and a local citizen named J.E. Chancellor for the theft of a pistol and some small valuables. But this was no ordinary arrest. Hodges asked if Garner had a warrant. When Garner admitted he did not, Hodges refused to comply. The constable drew his service pistol, demanding Hodges raise his hands and submit to a search. Hodges had a pistol on him, yet Garner failed to find it. According to Hodges, the constable physically abused him and even threatened to shoot him on the way to the jail. In a desperate act, Hodges drew his hidden weapon and fired, intending only to scare Garner. But instead, the shots struck true. Garner was hit twice and died the following day, July 4th. On September 20th, 1913, Arthur Hodges was convicted of murdering Constable William Garner. The jury sentenced him to death, setting his execution for November 12th, less than 2 months away. Hodges, poor and without resources, had no money to appeal the verdict. But word of his case spread, and strangers stepped in, raising funds for a last-ditch legal fight. Just 2 days before his scheduled execution, on November 10th, Hodges was granted a stay, his life temporarily spared. Despite this brief reprieve, the courts upheld the Clark County ruling. Nearly a year later, on October 12, 1914, Governor George Washington Hayes set a new execution date, November 14th. In a desperate bid for mercy, Hodges petitioned for a full inquiry into his mental state, claiming he might have been criminally insane at the time of the shooting. The petition was denied. His execution was pushed back again, first to November 21st, then, finally, to December 18, 1914, the day when Hodges' fate would be sealed. In his final hours, Hodges sought solace in faith. He prayed alongside religious advisors, sang hymns, and was baptized. He arranged for some of his personal belongings to be sent to his sister in Texas. Those who were with him until the end said Hodges remained hopeful, clinging to the faintest chance of a last-minute reprieve. But when the Arkansas Supreme Court refused to intervene, allowing the execution to proceed, Hodges reportedly told a reporter, "I won't have any girl now, will I?" The execution was witnessed by a small group of about a dozen physicians, a newspaper reporter, and prison officials. Hodges entered the chamber at 9:36 a.m., and 3 minutes later, at 9:39, a doctor pronounced him dead. Due to Arkansas law, newspapers published few details of the execution itself. Afterwards, Hodges was laid to rest in the prison cemetery at the Arkansas State Penitentiary in Little Rock. Hodges' execution was scheduled as part of a grim series, 8 executions over just 16 days. Yet despite the grim schedule, only 2 executions were carried out at that time. Arthur Hodges on December 18th, and William McNeely, executed 10 days earlier on December 8th. Gilbert A. Twig was born in Maryland in 1868. On the surface, his life seemed unremarkable. He was a miller by trade, an honest profession that kept bread on the table for many small towns across America. But Twig was also a man shaped by war. He served his country in the Philippine-American War and later during the American occupation of Cuba. These experiences left their mark on him. Discipline and hardship molded into his character. But so too, perhaps, the unseen scars of conflict. Before donning the uniform, Twig had been something of a drifter. He lived in Great Falls, Montana, then in the rough expanses of the New Mexico Territory, and later in Burden, Kansas. He never seemed to put down roots for long. His life carried the rhythm of someone always searching, always moving on. When he finally arrived in the town of Winfield, Kansas, Twig found work at the Baden Mills, a local hub of industry. Here, he earned a particular reputation. Town folks called him Crazy Twig, a nickname that followed him everywhere he went. But behind the label was a man who seemed harmless, even likable. By most accounts, he was agreeable in nature, spoke little of malice, and was known as a hard worker who rarely shirked his duties. And yet, nicknames are rarely born from nowhere. On the evening of Thursday, August 13th, 1903, the small town of Winfield, Kansas, gathered for what should have been a night of music and celebration. At the corner of 9th and Main, W.H. Cammon and his military band played to a crowd estimated between 2,000 and 5,000 people. Families, neighbors, and children filled the streets, eager for an evening of community and song. But in the shadows, danger lurked. Concealed in an alleyway behind the Oddfellows building, Gilbert Twig waited with a double-barreled shotgun in his hands. At around 9 p.m., he stepped from hiding and unleashed a barrage of gunfire into the unexpecting audience. Panic erupted. Screams filled the night air as chaos tore through the crowd. 6 people were killed instantly, or died within moments, and 3 more would later succumb to their wounds in the hospital. As the terror unfolded, 2 brave men rushed into the alley, attempting to stop Twig before more lives were taken. But before they could reach him, Twig turned his revolver on himself, ending his life in the very spot from which he had carried out his attack. When police searched his boarding room, they uncovered the disturbing writings that explained his motive. One letter, addressed to the public, revealed years of bitterness and resentment. Twig described the heartbreak of a failed relationship nearly a decade earlier, and accused the townspeople of Winfield of shunning him, of interfering in his personal life. He wrote of the desire to, in his own words, get even. Another letter, written a year earlier to a friend in Montana, hinted at his loneliness. It ended with a haunting reflection. It would have been much better for me if I had gotten married and settled down as you have done. I have no doubt that you are very happy, while I am not. In 1848, the tranquil life at Stanfield Hall, a stately mansion in Windham, near Norwich, was shattered by a brutal and calculated act of violence. Isaac Jeremy, a respected landowner, and his son, also named Isaac, were gunned down in their own home, one on the porch, the other in the hallway, by James Bloomfield Rush, a man who had been living under their roof as a tenant for nearly 10 years. Rush's relationship with the Jeremys had long been marked by financial tension. He had repeatedly mortgaged and remortgaged his farm, claiming the funds were intended for improvements. Yet, the farm's productivity never increased. As the deadlines to settle these mounting debts approached, Rush faced the very real threat of foreclosure and eviction, consequences that would not only strip him of his home, but also jeopardize the welfare of his children and his pregnant mistress, Emily Sanford, who worked as the family's governess. The pressures of financial ruin, personal desperation, and a complex web of relationships culminated in a violent decision that would shock the local community and leave a dark stain on the history of Norfolk. What had begun as a story of tenancy and debt turned into a harrowing tale of premeditated murder, betrayal, and the tragic cost of desperation. The Jeremy family had long been embroiled in disputes with relatives over the rightful claim of their estate. But Isaac Jeremy, the recorder of Norwich, and a highly respected figure with strong legal connections, was well positioned to retain his property, making it unlikely that any rival claim would succeed. This reality only fueled deadly and meticulous planned scheme. His intent was shocking: to murder both Isaac Jeremys, their servant, and the younger Isaac's pregnant wife, all while wearing a disguise, and then pinned the massacre on the family's supposed rivals. Rush enlisted Emily Sanford, the younger Jeremy's governess, and his pregnant mistress, to serve as an alibi, expecting her to claim that he had been at the farm during the time of the murders. He attempted to conceal his identity with a false wig and whiskers, but his efforts were incomplete. The surviving victims, Mrs. Jeremy, and the family servant, Elizabeth Chesney, were able to identify him despite the disguise. Stanford ultimately refused to corroborate his alibi, further unraveling his plan. Crucial evidence also emerged regarding forged documents with testimony from Alfred Schmee, the inventor of the Bank of England's official Black Bank Inc., linking Rush to the fraud. In 1849, Rush stood trial, representing himself in court. Despite his attempts at defense, the evidence against him was overwhelming. He was convicted and sentenced to death, and later executed by hanging. In a grim conclusion to the notorious case, Rush was buried within the grounds of Norwich Castle.